What's up, everybody? Let's talk about Mage DPS in Season of Discovery. So I'm going to talk about each of the Mage specs, which ones are best for dungeons and raids, and what you can do to optimize their performance. In Season of Discovery, Mages are incredible. They have hands down the best AoE of any class. They have a decent single target, and they can control the battlefield with Polymorph, Frost Nova, Blizzard. So they have a lot of tools at their disposal, and I'm going to tell you how to maximize their use. All right, the first thing that I want to talk about though is hit rating. Now this is pretty much exclusive to raids or any monster that's about 2 levels above you, because bosses and BFD are 2 levels above your character. This means all casters have a 6% chance to miss. Now 5% of that you can have talents, or you can get hit rating from items in order to get rid of that. So you only have 1% chance to miss. That final 1% though is there's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't matter how much hit rating you have. In Classic, you always have a 1% chance to miss with your spells, no matter how much hit rating you have. So you can get 1% hit from the caster DPS boots that you get from the epic chain that I made a video about already. You also can get another 2% hit from the mana oil that comes from BFD. This means in an optimal setup, you only need 2% hit. Now in the talent trees I'm about to show you, I'm going to assume you do not have those items. So if you do, then make a note that you can have probably 2 talent points that you can move out of the talent trees that I'll show you, and you can put them wherever you want. So that's something to keep a note of if you have those items. Now, one other thing to talk about for mages are the specific scrolls that you can get by identifying these mage scrolls that have been introduced with SOD. So there are multiple variants of these scrolls that you can actually identify, but only one of them actually seems to contain the extremely strong scrolls that I'm about to show you here. So these are the scrolls of arcane power, scroll of arcane accuracy, and scroll of arcane recovery. Now, in order to get these, you cannot identify any scroll. And this is just in our testing. I 100% do not know if this is accurate. This is just based on our testing alone that we've done. When we identified all of these scrolls, the only one that seemed to give these really strong, powerful scrolls was the Stethic Lunate scroll. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Everything else seemed to only give like scrolls of spirit or scroll of strength, like nothing that we actually really cared about. But to get the really powerful scrolls that again are on the screen, you have to identify Stethic Lunate. Now, if you have found it from other sources, please let me know, and please let other people know in the comments, because this is just from the testing of like 2 to 3 mages that we kind of poured a bunch of gold into this to try to figure out. The only other thing is that it does seem that you can get the scroll of reintegration, so the scroll that lets mages res, from any of these. So that does seem to be a random chance from any of the identifiable scrolls that you can get. But in order to get the scroll of arcane power, recovery, or accuracy, you have to identify Stethic Lunate. All right, now let's talk about each spec and how you can best set them up to perform at level 25. So the first one I want to start off with is the one that I think is the best, because I'm not going to make you wait till the end of the video, but that's Arcane. Arcane mages are masters of managing their mana. If done right, they have some of the highest single target caster DPS in the game. Arcane does have the highest skill cap of the mage specs, but you'll be rewarded if you can perfect it. Now let's talk about talents. So this is the Arcane spec that I like the most. It gives you spell hit, clear casting for better mana, wand specialization for when you run out of mana on those longer fights, and 5% mana regen while casting is a nice little bonus. Now for your runes as an arcane mage, you either want to use Burnout or Enlightenment in your chest. This is just going to depend on the fight length, where Burnout's going to be better on shorter fights and Enlightenment's going to be better on longer fights. For your legs, you want to go Living Flame or Arcane Surge. I'll be honest, I haven't unlocked Arcane Surge yet because it's behind the Waylaid Supply Crates rep, but I think that will be a nice little mana regen after you burn through all of your mana. Living Flame's really good on Cleave AoE when you have a bunch of mobs stacked, but until you get Arcane Surge, I would just roll with Living Flame. And then of course on your hands, you want Arcane Blast. That's really the bread and butter of this spec. And when we talk about the rotation, you'll see why. Now for spells and abilities. Let's just talk through these before we actually talk about the rotation. Arcane Blast is really what makes this spec work. When you cast Arcane Blast, you get a stacking buff. This increases the damage of all other arcane spells by 15% and the mana cost of Arcane Blast by 175%. Note that Arcane Blast does not get stronger as you cast this, only your other spells do. So this is going to be the battery that controls 1, how much damage you do, and 2, how much mana you use. And then Arcane Missiles is what we're going to buff with these Arcane Blast stacks. So the rotation will look like this. On an optimal fight, you want to Arcane Blast 3 times and then cast Arcane Missiles. And you just want to do that constantly as you go through your mana. Now, if a fight is shorter, you can try Arcane Blasting 4 times and then going into an Arcane Missiles. This is going to use up your mana extremely fast. But if a fight's like 30 seconds or something, you might be able to get away with it. If your mana is struggling or it's a much longer fight, you can do Arcane Blast times 2 into an Arcane Missiles. Everything about Arcane is managing your mana. The other spell that I did not mention is Living Flame. This spell you want to send immediately on a single target fight, or if it's a fight where ads are going to spawn, wait for them to spawn, wait for them to be on top of the boss, and then send it and you will do a ton of damage with it. Now, what are the pros of Arcane? It has really high burst damage. You're going to do a ton in the first few seconds of a fight relative to other casters. It has decent sustain if done well. This is really a skill cap class. The cons is mana management. This might not be something that you want to do, and it can be tricky to learn. So just practice and don't feel bad if your damage isn't that great at first as you try to figure it out. All right, now let's talk about fire. Fire mages blow up their enemies with big crits and ignite ticks. They can be bursty, but they don't really have the mana to sustain themselves. So they're gonna do more wanding than Arcane or Frost, which is the really unfortunate side of this spec. Now let's talk about the fire talent tree. First of all, we're gonna start off with elemental precision in the frost tree for spell hit. Now remember, we're going for 6% hit here, but if you have the other items, you can reduce points out of this. We're going for improved fireball for shorter cast times. Ignite, because why are you playing fire without ignite? Flamethrowing for some extra range, and 1 point in Burning Soul for reduced threat and some pushback protection. You can absolutely move around the point in Burning Soul and the 2 points in Flamethrowing to wherever you want. I just like this setup the best personally. Now on to fire runes. In our chest we have Burnout, in our legs we have Living Flame, and in our hands we have Living Bomb. These are really the only options here. Now, Living Flame, as I mentioned before, is a really strong AoE spell. Living Bomb is even stronger because Living Flame has a 1 minute cooldown. Living Bomb you can spam on every single monster that is grouped up. And if you do so, your damage will be insane. Living Bomb really is the bread and butter of the Fire Mage, and you can use it in other mage specs, but this is going to be hands down the strongest AoE ability in the game right now. Now the gameplay here is really just cast Fireball and maintain Living Bomb. You really hope you get crits because your crit chance while you have Burnout is still not particularly high, and you really want Ignite procs in order to keep your damage high. But if you're spamming Fireball, you're going to go very fast. Now Fireball and Scorch have the same mana to damage ratio. It just feels a lot worse casting Scorch, I'll be honest, and it is less DPS because you don't have the reduced cast time that you have on Fireball. So that's something to think about, where if your mana is low, you can cast Scorch, but you are probably better off just wanding until you can cast a few fireballs instead. Now, what are the pros? Every crit feels awesome, especially with the Burnout talent, but that is about it. The cons are Fireball spells cost a lot of mana, and we don't have any mana regen talents. We don't have a way to get any mana back from our crits, which we will at 40, but just not at level 25. So it makes Fire really hard to play unless the fight is extremely short. And in that case, you might as well be playing Arcane with Arcane Blast because you'll probably be doing more damage with that instead. All right, now let's talk about Frost Mage. I'll be honest, I haven't really played Frost all too much outside of leveling. Frost was okay while leveling, but Fingers of Frost and Ice Lance just don't really do that much damage. It does feel good in the first few levels, but after that, you see how weak Frost is compared to Fire and Arcane. So I have to say, I do not recommend this spec, but let's talk about it anyway. This talent setup is extremely simple. We again have Elemental Precision for 6% chance to hit. We have improved Frostbolt to shorten our Frostbolt cast times. We have Ice Shards that we get 100% increased damage on our critical strikes from Frost spells. And then we have Piercing Ice, which gives us a nice 6% damage. Now what you could actually do as well is remove a point from Piercing Ice to get improved Blizzard, as this is going to allow you to effectively AoE slow a large group of mobs, which could be beneficial for your group. And I would say that's probably Frost Mage's greatest utility, is the control of the battlefield. Because if you also put a point into Cold Snap, then you are able to Frost Nova quite often. You have improved Blizzard to slow, and you can just do a lot to make the fight easier for your friends, even though you're not going to be contributing a ton of damage yourself. Now, runes for the Frost Mage are a little bit tricky because I don't think the Frost runes are particularly good. Fingers of Frost and Ice Lance just don't feel like they do a whole lot of damage, and Fingers of Frost doesn't feel like it procs all that often. So in the chest slot, I'd recommend Burnout because we already have 100% increased damage to our crits. For the hands, I think Living Bomb is going to be better than Ice Lance because you might as well get some strong AoE in. And for your legs, this is actually the only spec that I would recommend Icy Veins for. I don't think you have the mana sustain in the other specs to fully utilize the haste that you get from Icy Veins, but I think Frost, because of the low mana cost of Frostbolt, actually really can use this effectively. Now your damage is going to be lower with Frost than Fire or Arcane, but maybe you want to play Frost because you like the utility that it has of being able to slow and kind of crowd control people, especially if you're using it in Ashen Veil or whatever PvP you might be doing. So I can totally understand why somebody might want to run this spec. I just can't say that I would recommend it for PvE. Now the final thing I want to talk about is Icy Veins. It is an extremely strong cooldown, and for Fire and Arcane I recommend that you do not take this. Now I want to explain why. Our mana situation right now is so bad, just honestly just so bad, that unless the fight is extremely short, and I do mean extremely short, like 20 seconds, you're not going to be able to utilize Icy Veins because you're going to run out of mana so quickly. Now, depending on your situation, if you have a lot of pumpers in your group, this might work for you. I didn't want to recommend it because I don't think the majority of people should use it, at least at the beginning. But I think it's something that if you're trying to pump, you're trying to parse at the end of this phase, or even, as people start to gear up and figure out their classes and do more damage, that would be the time to use it. Do not use it on your first few clears of BFD because I think you would regret it. That's just something that I wanted to make a note of here. And that's it for this guide. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have some good pumping in your future. Anyway, my name's Pantsface, and I'll see you in the next one.